diagram, and what you can do is you can take the events in the cardiac cycle and you can hook them up with all the different pressures and electrical events, so the physical and electrical events that are happening, and you can study the whole thing together in one giant diagram.
In groups of 3.
Yeah.
No more than groups of 3.
It's helpful if you want to use it. I'm not going to put the Wiggers diagram on the test, but if you want to put the whole, if you think maybe you want to be a cardiac nurse or cardiac something, then you should probably look into this to put the whole picture together. When you took the class, Jacqueline, did she have you do the Wiggers diagram? Did she ask questions on the Wiggers diagram? No. Okay. Well, I don't feel bad about it, because, yeah. And then here's just another picture of the Wiggers diagram. It shows how all the pressures correlate, the pressures and volumes correlate with the mechanical events of filling and injecting blood. And I put green boxes because you just need to know for the test, you just need to know the 4 events in the cardiac cycle. Now we're going to talk about ECGs or EKGs if you're in Germany, because Germany, I guess, cardiac is spelled with a K instead of a C. It's called an EKG or ECG. But why is it that the electrical signals don't go from the atria right into the ventricles? Why do you need that cardiac conduction system? Why do you need the AV node, the bundle of His, and the bundle branches? Why, if you have gap, why don't you get the action potential traveling from the atria directly into the ventricles? Why do you need that conduction system? No, so we're talking about the electrical system. So what I'm saying is, if you want to get an electrical signal from the SA node, living in the atria, if you want to get that signal to contract into the ventricles, you have to follow the electrical signaling pathway, which is the SA node, AV node, interventricular bundle of His, right and left bundle branches, Purkinje fibers. If you are a signal from the SA node, you can only get to the ventricles through that pathway. Why is that? Why?
Nature.
Like, tell us why. Enough of this teasing.
Because.
Why is that the case? Okay, well, it tells you right here. So, there is a connective tissue skeleton. So if you make this oblique slice through the heart, and you look here, you've got connective tissue between the 2 atria and the 2 ventricles. There's a connective tissue skeleton. So that means you cannot get electrical signals through gap junction from atrial cells into ventricle cells. You can only get an electrical signal through that conduction pathway. And that's why I'm trying to show here the connective tissue skeleton that will block an action potential going directly from the atrium to the ventricles. So the electrical signal only goes where it's supposed to go, which is from SA to AV to bundle of His, to the right and left bundle branches, and to the Purkinje fibers. So in this cartoon, there would be a connective tissue skeleton running this way. So if you are an atrial cardiocyte living here at the periphery of the atrium, and you are a ventricular cardiocyte really close to that atrial cardiocyte, you can't talk to each other. If I'm an atrial cardiocyte out here, yeah, I got a signal from the SA node, but I can't give you that signal through my gap junction to the ventricle cell because of that connective tissue skeleton.
If it weren't for that fibrous layer, would the heart just contract everywhere all at once?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We wouldn't have the nice atria contract, wait for it, ventricles contract. We just have bulk contractions like spontaneously everywhere in the heart. It wouldn't work. Now we're gonna look at the ECG, and then you guys are gonna get on the machines here, these little blue boxes. You're gonna do ECGs on each other, or you'll pick one person in your group, and you'll do an ECG on them. So the ECG, or electrocardiogram, shows electrical events that lead to the mechanical events of contraction. The electrical events have to occur first, then the mechanical events occur, but the mechanical events, you don't see those on the ECG. You just see electrical events on the ECG. And here's an ECG. It looks like an action potential. It looks like a single action potential in a single cell, but it's not. What some geniuses did is does everybody kind of know what an ECG is, where you put the leads on your body and then you get electrical information about the heart? But really, what it is it's collecting information, electrical information about the entire heart, not just a single area of the heart. It looks like an action potential, but it's not. So let's start on this. On the x-axis is time, so in seconds in this graph, and then millivolts is on the y-axis. So you start here in the SA node. You start the signal with the pacemaker cells, and then you get this thing called a P wave on the ECG. The P wave represents atrial depolarization. So all this P wave represents every single atrial cardiocyte depolarizing at the same time. What does that mean? What's happening when an atrial cell is depolarizing?
Action potential.
That's the depolarization phase of the action potential in a single cardiocyte, but what's happening, what's the channel that's opening?
Oh, the
Sodium.
Sodium channel, yeah. And all of the cardiocytes together give you the P wave. So this is not atrial depolarization. This is not a single cell depolarizing. So you get the signal from the SA node, both atria depolarize, and you see this on your ECG. And then, after the atria depolarize, the AV node also gets that signal from the SA node. And the AV node will send that signal to the AV bundle of His, right? What's that for? The
just new markers.
new markers. Woo-hoo! It's a good day at Kima Community College East Campus. New markers. Did I introduce you guys to Vanessa yet? I forgot. You guys know Vanessa? That's Vanessa. Vanessa. Thank you. New markers. So, the signal goes then, as you know, from the AV node to the AV bundle of His, right and left bundle branches, and the interventricular septum. What's this thing, the interventricular septum?
Separates the two ventricles.
Separates the two ventricles, yeah. Then, so we're still just doing the P wave, atrial depolarization. After atrial depolarization, you have the signal go from AV node, AV bundle of His, bundle branches, Purkinje fibers to the ventricular cardiocytes. And now what are the cardiocytes, the ventricular cardiocytes, going to do when they receive that information, that electrical information? Yes, they'll depolarize and they'll contract. When all the cells in both ventricles depolarize, you get this thing called the QRS complex. QRS. This thing represents ventricular depolarization. So they call it the QRS complex or the QRS spike on ECG. All the cardiocytes in the ventricles are depolarizing at the same time. Now, why can they all depolarize at the same time? Gap junctions, yeah. That information from the Purkinje fibers gets to a few ventricular cardiocytes And then those ventricular cardiocytes tell all the ventricular cardiocytes that they should depolarize at the same time, and you do it through gap junctions. That's a QRS spike. Now, if all the cells in the atria depolarize, then all the cells in the atria have to repolarize. You can't see atrial repolarization on the ECG because it's hidden underneath ventricular depolarization, which is so huge. So you have the atria, all the atrial cells depolarize, they repolarize, can't see it. Ventricular cells depolarize, that's QRS, and then all the ventricular cells repolarize, that's the T wave. And then you have here's a PQ interval. So just from what we know about the P wave, what do you think the PQ interval is? Well, that's a good point. It's not during the PQ interval, the mechanical event that's happening is atrial contraction. That's true.
Is that how long they contracted for?
Yeah, it's from the beginning of atrial depolarization to the beginning of ventricular depolarization is PQ interval. And then the ST segment,
What's QRS?
oh no, let's not talk about plateaus ever again.
What is QRS stand for?
It's
Just the way
No, that's-
I think it's just
when you start
following
rubbing it in the
alphabet.
ground, then there's a point where it gets even funnier.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet? Okay. Let's keep. Okay. So, the action potential of the ventricular myocytes, remember that they had that plateau phase? The action potential of those myocytes are in plateau, and the ventricular myocardium is completely depolarized. So this is the initiation of ventricular depolarization. You're still depolarized in this ST segment, and then the ventricles, all the cells repolarize at once because they have gap junctions telling each other, let's do this repolarization all at once, and that's the T wave. So what do you think would cause an enlarged P wave? What pathological condition, or maybe not pathological, would you see the P wave get bigger? Well, you have to think of what makes the P wave. What's making that? Why is there a P
The
wave?
SA node.
Atria filling with blood? No?
What's making this electrical event called atrial depolarization?
Is it the SA node?
Let me think of a different way to ask it. What event is happening during atrial depolarization?
Sodium's needed.
Every single cell in the atria, they're all depolarizing at the same time. So you're all right. I wanted to step back and get a bigger picture to try to help you answer this question. But you're right, you guys were talking about channels. Every single cell in your atria are depolarizing, or sodium is rushing in, at the same time. So how would you make that wave bigger?
More sodium.
Hypopolarization? A larger chemical signal for a stronger beat. Increase the pressure.
Actually, yeah, you could do it that way. Yeah, I see what you're saying. What happens more in real life is people have enlarged atria. But you're right, hypothetically, you could have more, something happens to your channels and now a buttload of sodium is rushing into all of the cells in your atrium. You would get a larger P wave. But what you'll see in the clinic is people come in with enlarged atria. So you get a bigger P wave. And then what would so with that logic, what would cause a larger QRS complex? Same thing, an enlarged ventricle. Yeah. And then I put this up. This is from your book. This is kind of cool because it shows step 1. Here's the P wave, atrial depolarization. And it kind of shows how the atria start to depolarize. And then here in this segment, the atria are fully depolarized. And then it shows here the atria are repolarized during this part of the ECG. But why don't we see the atrial repolarization on the ECG?
It's hidden.
It's masked by the larger QRS complex. And then it shows ventricular, during the QRS, ventricular depolarization begins. And then in this little segment, ventricular depolarization is complete, so orange is throughout the whole ventricle. And then you start ventricular repolarization and go back to the beginning. So this kind of, I like this from, usually I don't like Marieb figures, but good job, Marieb, on this one. So are you ready to do some ECGs?